The Sultanate. For many years, the sultans of Istanbul have laid claim to the holiest lands of the world and defended them against the depredations of the infidel, the raider, and the thief. Grown idle and lazy with the wealth of their realm, the Sultanate for a while appeared in danger of collapsing under the pressure of foreign enemies. Now enriched by the fount of knowledge unlocked by the new learning, the Sultanate has been revitalized as a world power. The new learning has not been the only revelation received by the Sultan and the sublime Porte. Secret friends of the Sultanate have explained that all is not quite what it seems in the Dystopian Age. A greater threat than the petty, saber-rattling great power exists, and it is the duty of all to oppose this dark curse before it destroys the world. Intercepted epistle from Sirkan Osman. My High Sirkan, greetings under the light of the All-Shard. From the congregation of the Holy Order of Man in the Levant, greetings to High Sirkan Abnir from Sinkar Osman. May the All-Shard forever bless us with his revelation. First, let me beg your indulgence, for I felt a written report was the most useful way of fully updating you as to our situation here. The man I have entrusted with this packet is amongst my most dutiful speaker here in Istanbul, and I have much confidence that this packet reached you far swifter than it might otherwise. Secondly, may I communicate my thanks for your own recent epistle distributed last month? Our congregation was enthusiastic by your words concerning that ever-increasing threat posed by the tainted, and we have redoubled our efforts here to secure our order's position and to bring about the final victory. This situation here in the Sultanate continues to be positive, but I fear we will soon reach an uncomfortable moment of crisis. As you have so often warned, only by being prepared for an event can we ever hope to control it. I have tried my best to place our force in a position to exploit whatever should happen here. Nonetheless, I feel that I would benefit from your own expertise in this situation. I hope you will forgive the following historical background, but I feel only by explaining the context in which the order finds itself today can you truly understand the predicament we face. The Ottoman advance. The modern Sultanate owes its existence to the conquest of the Turkish people began in 1299. At first merely a tribal confederacy under Osman I, the Sultanate soon expanded into the rest of the Middle East and the Levant. After 1354, the Ottomans conquered much of the Balkans, becoming a transcontinental power. Under the leadership of one Sultan Mehmed, called the Conqueror, the Sultanate finally ended the existence of the last vestiges of the old Roman Empire, dismantling all that remained of the Byzantine power and eventually breaking their power entirely with the capture of Constantinople itself. From this new capital, the Sultanate and its officials have weathered many crises through their history. Many wars and campaigns were fought against encroaching European powers in the Mediterranean, as well as many Ottoman attempts to expand into Europe proper. Under the reign of several wise sultans, the Sultanate also expanded south and west along the Middle East and Middle Sea, to the shores of the Iranian Gulf and the Arabian Sea. These Persian and Arabian conquests had a major impact on Ottoman culture and society. A renaissance of Persian literature sparked resurgence in ancient forms and practices amongst the people of the Sultanate and its rulers. They adopted the title Padishah, meaning great king from the Persian language, and incorporated Persian styles and forms into their government. Even today, the governors of provinces are referred to as satraps, whilst military generals of sufficient wealth and influence may claim the title of Spahbed, which conveys suitable authority over all military dealings in an entire province. The dominance of the Ottoman sultans over all the holy sites of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism has ensured its spiritual as well as political hold over its people. Relaxed toleration laws, particularly when compared to European norms, helped to develop a culture that cut across religious lines, not to mention the wealth brought in by the trade between East and West that flowed through the Ottoman domains. The sick man of Europe. Such was the strength of the Sultanate that many expected her to join the ranks of the great powers around the dawn of the 19th century. Yet for all this success in charting a course amongst the other nations of the world, the Sultanate was not in a strong position after the end of the Prussian Wars. Decades of mismanagement had left the Sultanate military and economically weak. Dissident movements in the Arabian and Persian territories fought on-again, off-again campaigns of politically motivated brigandage. Prussian and Russian expansion threatened to destabilize the Ottoman Balkans, whilst mercenaries took up the cause of Greek independence. At sea, Ottoman power waned on both sides of Dardanelles Strait, as both the League of Italian States and Russia made place for overall dominance in their respective areas. The Ottoman military was underfunded and poorly equipped, a shadow of the organization that had once made the walls of Vienna shake. Postscript, it is likely that much of these disturbances owed something to the presence of hex taint amongst the outcast and oppressed populations of the Sultanate. The Ottoman economy likewise faltered as the other powers began industrializing. Where once the fine artisan crafts of the Sultanate would have fetched high prices on the international market, they were now tardy relics in comparison to the mass-produced goods churned from the factories of the established powers. Much wealth was squandered by the sultans of this time on personal luxuries and excesses, and Ottoman infrastructure began to crumble and rot away. Only the Herculean effort of a few reform-minded ministries with a grand vizierate prevented the Sultanate from collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions and being carved up by the other world's powers in a frenzy. The new learning. As with all autocracies, the character of the supreme ruler often has disproportionate effect on the realm that they control. Thus, after decades of weak rulers, more concerned with their own indulgence than the realm they were supposed to steward, the Sultanate appeared racked with poverty, crumbling infrastructure, and host to a dissatisfied and fractious populace. Into this vacuum stepped the late great Sultan Mehmed the Learner, named for the conqueror of Istanbul and successor to perhaps the most dissolute and indulgent of all the failed sultans. The previous sultan, who even now is not named in official histories for his cruelty and debauchery so shocked the nation, was Mehmed's uncle, and rumors persist that his death was so decadent as to forbid description for fear of embarrassment. With his death, that line of the family failed, and a new dynasty was raised to the throne. Postscript. A convenient story. Mehmed was a great man, but was not above violence when necessary. In truth, his uncle likely died at the sharp end of a blade, traveling at high velocity. Mehmed the Learner launched himself immediately into a bold reform movement, incorporating many scholars into his government. The Sultan himself made stringent cuts to the budget allocated for his own personal amusement and plowed huge reserves into developing education and technology throughout his realm. The fruits of the new learning were almost immediately felt. Rapid modernization led to a booming domestic economy, private income soared as wages rose, whilst once dwindling support for Ottoman rule rebounded exponentially. There were few areas that Mehmed the Learner did not excel in. An accomplished scientist, he was at home discussing revolutionary new metallurgical methods as he was discussing theology with the scholars of Istanbul. His faith in the abilities of his own people was rewarded time and again, most markedly when Ottoman engineers unearthed great petrochemical wealth within the Sultanate's territories that filled the coffers of the government and permitted further investment. By the time of Sultan Mehmed's death in 1858, the Sultanate had experienced a sea change its fortunes. No longer were its borders and sphere of influence under attack by rapacious foreign powers. No longer was the economy and government mere months away from collapse. A single flaw. Yes, Sultan Mehmed did have a flaw, one area where he failed to uphold the standards of excellence to which he had striven for the duration of his reign. Mehmed the Learner was not a family man, distant from his children, often by turns spoiling or chastising his progeny to extremes. Of his many partners during his reign, Mehmed produced only 2 children who survived to adulthood. The eldest, by his first wife, was Princess Scheherazade, a highly intelligent young woman hardened over time by parental neglect. The younger of the 2, sired from a concubine who remains hidden, was Prince Mustafa. Postscript. Ottoman medical science took a while to fully embrace the fruits of the new learning. Only now can their medical schools truly claim world class. Scheherazade proved to be as enthusiastic in learning as her father, plowing through the rigorous curriculum imposed on her and demanding more. In her academic pursuits, she sought the attention and praise of her absent father, but in burying herself in her studies, she made bridging the gulf between the two even harder. The slightest flaw in her work would bring harsh criticisms that she took to heart, whilst her greatest successes were damned with faint praise. Observation: forgive the time spent sketching her character, but I think such information will be useful in time. It will come as no surprise then that the princess soon sought better environments in which to develop her work. First she involved herself with major projects within the Sultanate, but later took on studies in the greatest universities of Europe. Her time there put her in contact with the Amis, and from there her intellect and her ambitions grew. As far as we know, the princess was a founding member of the Covenant of the Enlightened, and her activities since then have become notorious. Indeed, her involvement abroad was tolerated by the Sultan because it achieved the private objective he had held for many years. Princess Scheherazade, for all her abilities, would never succeed him to the position of Sultan. For one thing, her gender excluded her, and for another, the Sultan had grown increasingly fond of his son, Mustafa, and it was to him that he intended to pass the throne when he finally died. Postscript: truly, the sins of man are often born in their follies. Weird way to say it, Burger. Prince Mustafa was not cut from the same cloth as his father. His academic achievements were limited, and he received much praise for very little effort, to his sister's eternal envy. In many ways, Mustafa's interests ran more to those of his grand uncle's family than his father's, although in his mind, Mustafa was as much a man of the new learning as the rest of his family. Mustafa, however, valued, and still values, the appearance of success rather than the reality of it. Grand projects, glorious monuments, and stupendous works are to him the hallmarks of the new learning, instead of the rational deliberation of policy and the evaluation of effects. Postscript: I believe somewhat ironically that the term most appropriate here is that the prince is a Renaissance man, a shining new era. Therefore, in 1858, the 26-year-old Prince Mustafa succeeded to the throne of a realm at peace with its neighbors and with itself. The occasion was elaborate and glorious, full of speeches proclaiming the wisdom of the new Sultan's father and the glorious rule of the rejuvenated Sultanate. The only cloud was the absence of Princess Scheherazade, and through Prince Mustafa's sister received, at the instructions of the Grand Vizierate, a generous cash lump sum and annual stipend upon his coronation, but was politely asked not to attend the event itself. Sultan Mustafa quickly earned a reputation as a garrulous and cheery monarch. Whilst already a large man, he quickly grew several sizes as he indulged a bit too much in his appetite for fine foods. Yet even the return of the harem and the rich gowns and turbans of the old Sultanate could dim the people's love for their new ruler. Postscript: a curious truth. Sultan Mehmed was an excellent ruler, but austere and distant. He was universally respected, but not loved. Mustafa, on the other hand, is dissolute and disinterested, but is almost unfailingly loved by his people. Curious. Much of the day-to-day operations of the Sultanate fell to the Grand Vizier, Mehmed Pasha, who has served Sultan Mehmed faithfully in his final days as ruler. Many of the old policies continued, yet Sultan Mustafa quickly made a point of embarking on grandiose projects to demonstrate Ottoman prowess and ingenuity. Amongst these projects were the massive fortifications that now straddled either end of the Dardanelles, the construction of the brand new warships for the Sultanate Navy, and the extensive Gardens of Paradise initiatives where technology bought dearly from the Covenant of the Enlightened sources was used to green the desert and establish new and expansive cities throughout the Sultanate. In the process, Sultan Mustafa made quite a name for himself. He was touted in the press as a liberal reformer, feted worldwide for his great building project, and lavished with praise at home and abroad. He was dubbed by admirers as Sultan Mustafa the Golden, although in private his advisors began to doubt the wisdom of this public display of largesse. The Sultan's projects quickly exceeded the nation's ability to pay for them. Sultan Mustafa, the Golden-Plated. Grand Vizier Pasha was and remains a cynical rationalist. Unfailing, calculating, Pasha weighs every option within his finely tuned mind to determine the best course of action at each step. Nonetheless, he is a servant and not a ruler, and is dedicated to furthering the Sultanate's prosperity. It was Pasha who masterminded the exclusion of Princess Scheherazade from the succession, doubting her commitment to traditional Ottoman values, and it was Pasha who realized many of the Sultan's grand visions. The Grand Vizier was also the man who ensured the stability of the Sublime Treasury as the Sultan's vanity projects took their toll. New financial measures were introduced to raise more revenue, whilst the Secret Pasha arranged loans from various sources. Amongst his highest-ranking officials, Sultan Mustafa was soon referred to as the Golden-Plated, a play upon his popular name, Mustafa the Golden. It is clear that such whispers and rumors eventually reached the Sultan's ears, for he became more insecure even as further praises were heaped upon him for his national projects. It was around this time that Sirkan Dilan Kalus came into contact with the Sultan for the first time. The Greek insurrection. Finally, something about fighting back against the Ottomans. Greece is a stubborn and fractious region within the Sultanate. Its ancient history and legacy of resistance inspires certain sections of European society. Nations seeking to embarrass the Sultan frequently take up the cause of Greek independence when it suits their interests. Sultan Mustafa's reign has seen much investment in Greece in an effort quite openly to buy the loyalty of his Greek subjects. Concessions and reforms have granted further autonomy to the Greek people. At several points, a general amnesty has been offered to Greek fighters holed up in the mountains, an innovation in Sultanate policy and an option which even the Sultan's father never considered. Nonetheless, there are those too stubborn or too crazed to halt their struggle, and as we all know, it is to these poor souls that the taint of the hex calls most strongly. I understand you are more than familiar with the following details. Hi Sirkan, would allow me to emphasize certain aspects to more fully illustrate our position. As you know, it was in 1867 that Greek rebels were identified using hex weaponry during an attack on Erdrine. While conducting observance in the region, Sirkan Kalus was in a position to save a young man from a horrific fate during that attack. In this selfless act, Kalus won the gratitude of the young man's father, an influential figure with the Sublime Porter. Sirkan Kalus was summoned to Istanbul to meet with the Sultan that following month, and it is thanks to Kalus' persuasive words and sharp wit that we now enjoy the level of access and open influence in the Sultanate. The Blessed and Golden Sultan Mustafa I. Kalus explained to Sultan Mustafa the existence of two great forces at work upon the world, the divine, whom we refer to as the All-Shard, and the antagonist, referred in our fate as the Hex. Kalus presented these truths as but another layer of revelation upon existing fates, as to a certain extent they are, and for his eager listeners, explained that only with the aid of powerful mortals could the All-Shard vanquish the Hex and usher in a new age. Mustafa saw in this narrative an opportunity to exceed his father's legacy, and since that time has launched himself wholeheartedly in a new direction. No longer will his name be glorified for his largesse, it will also be remembered for his devotion and piety. With the support of the Sultan, the order was able to move freely throughout the Sultanate. Since our last reports, I can confirm that the entire Janissary Corps of the Sultanate army is now undergoing Spikat training. Those who resist have been quietly removed to other corps within the army. At present, 3 regiments of Spikat are now at full strength and are publicly recognized as the new face of the Divine Corps within the army. Mimreg have been placed in key positions throughout the remaining arms of the Ottoman military to provide oversight and identify those receptive to our teachings. The Bashan armature continues to grow apace, and other members of the congregation have been placed in positions of authority to ensure the further marginalization of oppressed groups and root out the hex taint wherever it is found or could potentially take root. The harsh penal code of the Sultanate has been incredibly useful in this project. Problems in the Sublime Portier. These successes have been bought at a price, however. While our fate is openly tolerated within the cities and the Sultan's personal guard includes 2 of our Korkaroli, we're still viewed with suspicion and resentment by those who would carve such influence for themselves. We have been denied leadership in the religious council, and our influence in civil government has only been secured in a few places where the Sultan's influence has been keenly felt or where we have had sympathy within the government already. Indeed, our presence here, whilst growing, remains constrained. It would not be impossible for a determined foe to disentangle us from our position and overturn all we have built. Our most dedicated opponent at present is the Grand Vizier himself. As I explained, the Grand Vizier is a cynical man and a rationalist. The logic of our mission here does not sit easy with his mind, especially weighing the potential damage we might cause to the realm with our rhetoric and policies. A viewpoint I understand, yet cannot condemn given the true nature of the threat posed by the Hex. It is Grand Vizier Pasha who has continued to frustrate some of our most dramatic reform proposals. He blocked our last request for parity in the religious councils of the Sultanate and frustrated careful plans to place order observers within the halls of each of the emirs and satraps who govern the outer provinces of the Sultan's domain. Our last budgetary request to the Sublime Treasury was also entangled in bureaucracy for almost 6 months, a fact which cost us dear. That said, it was our influence with the Sultan that prevented a proposal from Pasha that would have gifted us new headquarters beyond the Topkapi Palace, inevitably isolating us from the Sublime Portier. The Grand Vizier's bureaucratic obstructions are motivated by equal parts self-interest and self-preservation, I believe. Without the controlling hand of the Sultan's actions, Pasha fears he will be more unable to moderate the Sultan's more excessive tendencies. Pasha also worries that the national interest is being subordinated to the interests of a foreign cult, which is what he publicly claims when mustering opposition to us amongst the civil services. There is, however, another reason which I have recently discovered. The Sign of 40. A quick survey of the Grand Vizier's chambers was conducted 3 nights ago by specially selected Spica on my orders. The two managed to infiltrate that wing of the palace undisturbed and return with copies of a few of his papers. These were not particularly illuminating apart from the symbol found etched in the corner, 4 lines enclosing 4 intersecting circles. This symbol can be found all across the Sultanate, branded upon individuals or goods as well as locations. It is the Sign of 40, an allusion to the 40 Thieves of legend and a symbol of the most organized and dangerous criminal fraternity in the world, the House of Gold. Written down, it is strange to imagine how much fear that name invokes amongst the ordinary populace. In fact, the house is rarely named in full, called simply the Thieves or the Snatchers, or other such metaphors when necessary. The House of Gold began as narcotic smugglers, opium in particular, but have long since expanded into pretty much every single aspect of corruption. This has brought their thief kings incredible wealth and influence. The least unsavory of the operations is the lending of money to wealthy clients who have exhausted other options, and it was upon just such a transaction that this symbol was found the Grand Vizier's office. A sea of ships. For much of its history, a large part of the Sultanate military has been led by the position of the Kapuda Pasha, the commander-in-chief of both the navy and now the emergent air force too. Sultanate air power is a distinct element within the navy and provides air support to the modern Guardians of Paradise Sultanate naval battle groups. With aging engine nacelles purchased from the crown, the Sultanate navy was unremarkable indeed. Under the Sultan's instruction, this changed as engineers integrated magnetic impeller technologies from the Covenant of the Enlightened. Now, Sultanate vessels such as those from Egypt and Greece have a reputation for unmatched speed and maneuverability. Though preferring lighter craft such as fast cruisers, destroyers, and battle cruisers, the Sultanate uses these advanced vessels to rapidly respond to threats and take advantage of the changing global situation. With its ancestral naval and air command in the Turkish city of Karamusrel on the Sea of Marmar, the Sultanate has collectively had a long naval tradition and has emerged victorious from many conflicts around the globe. Under the new Sultan, the military budget has increased 20-fold, and it now makes use of the most of the Marmar Sea as a massive fleet manufacturer, training, and staging area. The Propontis region's critical nature to the Sultanate military power cannot be underestimated. Indeed, the great powers of all recognize that a move against the Sultanate would require a massive initial strike against the Marmar Basin. Though the crown favors a surface bombardment and the alliance, the polluting of the waterways themselves. The Commonwealth believes that skillful deployment of submersibles throughout the Bosphorus would achieve the greatest success, though certainly any such attack would wreak a terrible loss of life if successful. It is the more dispassionate military minds in the Covenant of the Enlightened who propose the most terrifying yet elegant yet devastating solution. the detonation of a sizable atomic device on the northern Anatolian fault, which lies along the Propontis region. Even naturally, this geological feature has triggered many major earthquakes in recent years. The detonation of such a device would in an instant destroy not only the military heart of the Sultanate, but would annihilate Istanbul and its political and religious centers too. Both the Sublime Portier and its allies have dedicated significant resources of their own to counter any such threats. Postscript, where the absence of such an attack to date speaks more of the success of these agencies, or rather a lack of resolve by the great powers, remains to be seen. Owing gold to the House of Gold. With expenditures such as the vast military program, I have been aware for a while that the Sublime Porter's finances were not as strong as they had been, but I had not realized quite how poor they were. In order to finance the Sultan's lifestyle and keep him malleable, the Grand Vizier had quadrupled the personal expenditure of the court. At the same time, of course, the government was plowing money into the Sultan's project like the Gardens of Paradise to develop the Sultanate and glorify its achievements. After the civil unrest, Sultan Mehmed had ensured from heavily taxing Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Persia. The Grand Vizier chose instead to finance much of this new extravagance with loans. Eventually, he had exhausted all reputable sources of money and turned to the House of Gold. It appears that in the last few months, the House of Gold have been buying up all the Sultan's debts and consolidating them in their own hands. Quite why remains something of a mystery, but I can only surmise that the thief kings in charge wish to ensure that the Sultanate is wholly indebted to them and can therefore expect concessions and favors in their own line of work. The House of Gold is something of an institution amongst the populace of the Sultanate, and to move against it openly will likely create a crisis the government is unwilling to contemplate. The Grand Vizier has thus far managed to keep the uncomfortable truth of the government's financial troubles out from the public eye. It is only a matter of time, however, before the story emerges into the public arena. Such scandal would have far-reaching consequences, not all of them beneficial for us. Whilst the revelations would certainly end the Grand Vizier's career and remove him as an obstacle, it would also rebound on the Sultan himself. Public confidence in his reign would likely collapse, and since the toleration of the order in some ways relies on his good name, we would undoubtedly suffer in the fallout. The worst case scenario could see the Sultan forced to abdicate, closing the Sublime Portier off to us and threatening to destabilize the entire Sultanate as different claimants fought for the throne. The looming threat in such a scenario would be the return of the exiled princess. The Crimson League. Ever since the coronation of Sultan Mustafa, Princess Scheherazade has kept herself amused using the funds she received from the government of her brother to continue her research as a member of the Covenant of the Enlightened. She was instrumental in funding and developing several Covenant projects and served as a Covenant ambassador to several capitals during the early years of her brother's reign. Exactly what role she played in the Covenant schism is unclear, as is our understanding of the event. In any case, her talents as both a leader and a strategist called her to explore other avenues for profit and adventure, and she expanded her own Promethean complex into a veritable armory, developing many different advanced weapons for sale to the great powers or for the use of the enlightened forces. Her contact with the Covenant War Master Schneider fostered an interest in military activities and the romance of a mercenary life. It is no surprise that the princess established her own mercenary outfit early in her Covenant career. Postscript, we believe the princess is operating from somewhere in Morocco, although that is pure conjecture. I would ask that we consider a detachment of Ipaetus or Astrea to investigate. This Crimson League is dismissed as a vanity project so far, as I gather amongst the halls of power. Staffed uniformly by noble adventurers and outlandish aristocrats, the organization has nonetheless developed a reputation amongst certain quarters as highly effective. Reports garnered from their operational activities indicate a technologically advanced force of unique aerial vehicles and experienced crews, capable of working together despite their flamboyant personalities and wreaking havoc in their wake. Postscript, a contact within the Crimson League can run into expenses of hundreds of thousands in sterling, so I am told. The Crimson League has become a thorn in the side of Sublime Portier, frequently striking at perceived threats to the Sultanate without the government's blessing at the whim of the exiled princess, and frequently making a diplomatic nuisance of themselves. There is a more worrying side to these concerns, however. If the Sultan were to fall, would his infant son be able to rally the military to his side against the might of the House of Gold? And would the exiled princess simply sit out and allow her nephew to succeed to the throne that she believes is rightfully hers? It's not. And if she did intervene, would she bring the Crimson League with her? Postscript. I believe a comparison with the Commonwealth's Black Wolf and his proximity to the Tsar's court would be apt here. A choice. As you can see, and I hope you will forgive the time it has taken to get here, the Order faces a crossroad here in the Sultanate. We have built up an excellent base of operations here, and our influence is expanding rapidly. The military potential alone for our alliance to the Sultanate cannot be overstated. However, all our progress could be undone in the next few years if we cannot manage the turmoil to come. The information about the Sultan's debts could be used to leverage the Grand Vizier out of office, or at least make him more compliant to our demands in the future. However, using this knowledge without due care could bring about the very scandal we seek to prevent. The wrong word to the wrong person could bring our position crashing down. On the other hand, failing to act to prevent crisis either by bailing out the Sultan with our own funds or somehow inveigling ourselves into the Vizier's good graces could put in a more perilous position if the secret does break. Postscript. Do we have already access to that amount? Could we source it from our Union holdings? And in the worst case scenario, in the event of the scandal precipitating a succession crisis, who do we support? The deposed Sultan, his infant son Prince Murad. Such decisions are far too complex to be taken here, which brings me to my final words. I ask you, I implore you, for the good of our order to convene a council as soon as possible to discuss the information I have sent you. I understand that the expectation is that I will be able to make such decisions on my own with the guidance of the Cor Caroli, but in this instant I desire the advice and guidance of more experienced voices. If at all possible, a visit from yourself would help greatly in easing the minds of us here in the Levant.